Good afternoon, Manhattan Valley Pediatrics. Welcome to our third installment of our Grow With Us series. And today we're going to talk about 2-month-olds. I'm just going to have Dr. Grant join us. One second. Okay, here she is. One second. Let's see. There she is.
Hi, everybody.
I forgot. Are you on call again, Jess?
I am on call, so if I jump off, it's just to answer a phone call, so I apologize.
All right, no problem. I was
Ignore
just
the mess that is my room right now.
I was just introducing the day, saying that we're here. I feel like I should move now that you're on the screen. You can't really see me well. Um, we're here to talk about 2-month-olds. This is our third installment of our Instagram series, Grow With Us. And every week or every other week, depending on our schedules, we're going to be discussing an age, and we're going to go chronologically. So at some point, we will get to your child's age, and these will be stored for eternity on Instagram. So if you ever want to look back, if your child's 1 month now and you want to watch the 2-month-old one a month from now, it's stored on our Instagram TV feed. Um, so with all that being said, welcome. I see we have some people watching today, which is great. And we're going to talk about 2-month-olds. So I figured we'd start just to begin with, talk about feeding. Sorry, I'm adjusting myself. Here we go. That's better. Jess, do you want to start talking about feeding while I get myself adjusted to this space?
Sure. I mean, I think that there's a little bit of a false belief that feeding's going to get much easier around 2 months and space out a lot. And I think it's very dependent on the baby, but I think a lot of babies who are breastfeeding do still feed a lot. You may begin to get some reasonable stretches in there. Oftentimes, kids do begin to feed more during the day and a little bit less at night, right around this age, I think. So you may begin to get some better sleep at night. You may not, but they still do tend to feed at least, I'd say, 6 times a day. And some are still feeding way more than that. Some are still feeding the good old 8 to 10 times a day with breastfeeders. And that's okay. I just say that to make people know that's normal. Another common thing I'll hear from moms at this age is, they come in with a baby who I call a Buddha baby, those big round cheeks, the big round belly that we love. And they say, my baby's not eating enough. And I say, really? Your baby looks like they're eating enough. And so some babies do become much more efficient eaters. Some babies are still a little bit slow on the breast, but some babies between 2 and I'd say 3 to 4 months can really shorten up their feeds, and they can feed as quick as 5, 6 minutes, 7 minutes, and they've gotten a full feed. So I wouldn't necessarily stress too much about that. If your baby looks healthy, they're probably doing okay. It is one of the reasons we bring them in so much to check. But definitely, if you notice a little change, that might be what's going on. Um, Bottle fed babies may begin to space out their feeds a little bit. They may begin to increase the amount in their feeds a bit. So some 2-month-old babies can take 4 or 5 ounces in a feed. It really depends on the baby. Some who have reflux are still taking smaller amounts more often, and that's totally okay as well. There's really a lot of variability, I find, at this age and what normal is. What do you think?
I feel the exact same way. It's still kind of all over the place. A lot of people come in, sometimes even as early as a 1 month visit, but definitely at the 2 month visit asking, should I be having my baby on an every 3 hour schedule at this point? All of my friends say, the baby's eating at 12, 2, 5, 8, and people, do sometimes try to schedule their babies at this age. And usually my answer is don't even try, because I think that it's still sort of like the 1 month old. They're still the boss. Like, they're hungry, you have to feed them. You can't really put off the feeds at this stage. I mean, if you've seen us recently and they're growing well, if your baby's crying for 5 or 10 minutes, you don't have to panic and feed them. They're out of that zone where we're really worried about the weight gain. But I think it's too hard to schedule them at this stage. It's still chaotic. There's going to be days where they're feeding constantly every hour, and other days where they sleep for 5 hours at a time. So it's still a little bit all over the place. Especially for breastfed babies, who sometimes will eat more and sometimes eat less. Bottle fed babies, you sometimes get a little more regularity, but that's not necessarily the case, anyway. So it's very baby dependent, but I agree. It's still very frequent feeds. At this point, if you're breastfeeding, your milk supply should be pretty well established. So it's nice that source of stress and anxiety is off the table. So you should feel like, there's more dependability in terms of your supply, or at least you've figured out what you're doing in terms of supplementing. Um, but they're still feeding a lot, often still feeding quite a few times at night. And that, does anybody have any questions about feeding their 2 month old? And as Jess sort of touched, the reef, really be kicking in at this point. Um, so you might start to see, sorry, my child's like tantruming in the background right now because she fed our dog chocolate. Um, so we're having a little drama in the house. Um, anyway, so, um, the reflux can be, you're in the thick of reflux at this point. It tends to, start around 6 weeks, continue until around 3 or 4 months. So you may have your child spitting up a lot. So sometimes that can make the feeds a little more challenging.
And I think if reflux is particularly bad, it's a good time to call one of us and touch base with your doctor. There are some kids who need medication. Most don't, but some kids do. And we're certainly happy to have that conversation.
Yep. Yeah, if you feel like your child is spitting out more than they should, or you feel it's interfering with the feeds and making it really difficult for you to feed your baby, do not hesitate to reach out. We are here for you. It can be really, really difficult. Um, so I think we covered the feeding stuff unless anyone has any questions. I don't see anything yet. Do you see anything, Jess?
Nope, vitamin D should be continued. We talked about it last time. It should be going for breastfed babies throughout your breastfeeding career. So keep on giving your vitamin D. I think that's it. I don't see any questions.
All right, fantastic. So let's talk a little bit about sleep schedule in the 2 month old, which is also maybe along with the feeding schedule, also still fairly unpredictable. So usually at the 2 month visit, I start talking with almost every family I work with about setting a bedtime routine. When the babies are little, I mean, little is relative, but from birth until around somewhere between 2 and 4 months, they often are going to bed on the late side, and that's kind of normal. And the bedtime generally moves earlier, usually somewhere between 3 and 4 months. Even if they're in bed early, though, I think at 2 months, their brains have the capacity to recognize, to make some like associations with things. They don't remember much, but they can make some associations. So usually what I tell people is, even if it's not at the same exact time every night, start a routine, do the same thing about every night. So bath, turn on the music, feed them, turn on the noise machine, and feed them until they're sort of drowsy and start putting them to sleep drowsy but awake if you can. I'm not saying you should necessarily let them cry it out at this stage. I think it's a little early for that, but I think it's a good time to try to teach them to self-soothe. Some babies are more high need. They're not going to tolerate this at this point, but I think it's worth a try. And I would do it at the very least, do the same routine every night so that the baby starts to make those associations with sleep. And so it will make it easier when you try to sleep train them further down the road. It's still fairly normal for them to wake up at night. I would say a good sleeper who's 2 months old feeds and goes right back to sleep. I see that a lot of babies fall into the pattern of they go to sleep somewhere between 8 and 10 at night, wake somewhere between 12 and 2, wake again around 4, and sleep until 6 or 7. I would say that's kind of like the standard best case scenario for a 2 month old, unless you're one of those rare, lucky mothers or fathers who like has that baby who sleeps, 6 to 8 hours at this stage, but that is not the norm. Jess, do you have any comments on that?
No, I totally agree. I do think the other thing, if some of you guys have babies who are a little bit older than 2 months, you don't have to feel like you missed the boat. You can start the idea of a routine at any point. This is not, I missed my critical moment. Now my kid's never going to sleep. So you could kind of, I think, what you were saying is perfect. And you can start that really whenever, around this age on that you find it works for your family.
I agree. It doesn't have to happen exactly at 2 months. I always bring it up just so, because I was like, when I had Margot, I was completely clueless. Like, I showed up at a friend's house at some point, and she's like, "So what's going on? What time does she go to bed?" I was like, "Well, I don't know, whenever she falls asleep." And she's like, "You need to set a bedtime. It's time." And I was like, "Oh, okay, good to know." And it had actually like changed our lives, being able to like figure out how to get her to bed. My husband and I could like have 2 hours to order dinner and watch whatever we're watching at that point, probably The Wire or whatever it was. If I'm
I
dating.
think the other thing I think is if you have two kids, I do think there's a good chance at this age you're putting your older one to bed before you do any of this. I think, I find that Like my younger one takes a lot of time to get down, has always been the harder one. And they do tend to go to bed so late that even though intuitively I think people want to put the baby to bed earlier, I think it takes quite a while to get to that point. So don't be surprised, especially if your older one doesn't nap anymore, if they need to go to bed earlier, which is fine. Then it gives you some time to work on the bedtime routine, which I don't think is a bad thing. I think trying to work on it when you have another kid hanging on you is very difficult.
I agree. And then in terms of naps, it's still often all over the place. Naps still tend to be pretty short, pretty frequent. You're not going to have a set nap routine, just like you're not going to have a set feeding routine for a while. I tend to think that that first nap of the day usually has to happen within 1 to 2 hours after they wake up in the morning. And I often encourage people to try to do that one in the crib or the bassinet. And then I say the rest you can just sort of do like on the go if you need to. I do still feel like 2 months you're still in that zone where you could spend half your day trying to get your baby to nap, which can be very frustrating. But it's still pretty normal for them to have short, frequent naps. They want to be on you. They don't like to sleep on their own. They want to sleep in the stroller or the carrier. But if you can get one or maybe two of them in the bassinet just to try to, get the hang, let them get the hang of it, I think that that's always helpful if you're able to. I know it's hard to do that.
I
Uh,
agree.
all right. Any questions about sleep or napping from anyone watching? I don't see anything yet. Okay. Jess, do you want to tackle development?
Sure. I think developmentally, many babies still seem a little bit blob like, a little bit boring. I don't think you're going to get all of a sudden a ton of activity from your baby. The things I talk with my families about working on, I talk about tummy time, which we spoke about at the 1 month visit. So doing, a good 10 minutes a day in little 3 minute spurts on the belly, maybe one of them on the boppy pillow. So they have a little bit of chest incline, arms up, neck, straightening type idea. Then the other things that I work on, they're beginning to kind of have a little bit better visual tracking. So you can certainly work on that. You can do a rattle. You move really slowly in front of them. You can do the activity mat where the things hang over their head and they can watch the jingling things, that they have lights, those kinds of things. Um, you could do the swing mobile over their crib. Those are all good visual stimulation at this age. They begin to coo, so you can certainly coo back to them. I typically say at 2 months they coo, you coo. At 4 months they coo, you talk. So I tend to still be doing a lot of cooing at this age, but there's definitely nothing wrong with doing more actual talking to them. Um, and then lots of smiling. They begin to smile around this age, so lots of smiling at them. Lots of recognizing your face. We kind of say about breast to face, so about however many feet that is a good distance to have them looking at your face when they're like kind of laying back on the boppy pillow. Um, and then, you may want to, somewhere between 2 and 4 months, begin to introduce the idea of reading to them. They're certainly not listening to the story, but they are beginning to kind of hear words. They're beginning to hear a lullaby sound of your voice and the lilting lyrics. They're beginning to realize you think book is important. With my first, I started around 2 months. With my second, it was much closer to 4 months. I just could not handle it at 2 months. And I think anywhere in there is fine. Um, and I think that's about all that you get out of them. I don't think you get a whole lot of reward for it yet. Anything else that you talk about?
Just, they can hear now and they can play music. They will enjoy that. Sometimes they'll find it soothing. Sometimes it's just soothing for you to have that background noise. But I agree. I mean, it's very gratifying because they start kind of like noticing you and smiling, and you can get that like adorable 2 month old smile, and they start cooing. But they're still, not doing so much. They're not very mobile. They're not very coordinated. But the smile is huge when you've been like really suffering through the first couple months with a, tough baby. If they're not all tough, but many of them are. Um, and then you get that smile and you realize that like it matters that, they're enjoying something that you're doing. It's really it. I can't remember the eye contact, but you'll start seeing more contact and them following you a little, which is nice. And you touch stimulation that you can provide. Um, so yeah, that's kind of the 2 month olds do. And then and we just wanted to touch a little bit upon like going back to work, what that can mean. Often mothers or fathers, and people are getting paternity leave a lot now as well, are going back to work somewhere around anywhere between 6 and 12 weeks, unless you're fortunate to have longer than that. So it's sort of the time to start thinking about what you're doing for childcare, how you are going to handle it mentally, being separated from your baby. I think it's a good idea at this point. I mean, COVID has complicated everything, obviously, and not as many people are actually physically leaving to go back to work. It's a good time to try out maybe a babysitter or a grandparent watching the baby for an hour because it can be really hard to separate from your baby the first time you leave them. Jess, do you have any comments on this stuff?
No, I mean, I think that you're right. I think that many of us have to begin to separate around this age. And I think it was the single hardest thing I've ever had to do. I remember, you know, speaking to Dr. Gotti before I came back and asked, what should I do to prepare? And she said, you're not going to do anything to prepare. There is no preparation. It's going to feel terrible no matter what you do. And then it's going to get better. And she was totally right. The first couple of days that I worked, I took a cab home, all of 10 blocks to make it home literally 3 minutes earlier to be with my daughter. And now I don't. And some days I even take the longest route home possible. And so, you know, it does get easier. I think you can prepare in the sense of having a nanny that overlaps. You're going to have a nanny, having a nanny that overlaps you for a couple weeks. So the day of transition's easier. You have a little more confidence. They know how you do things. You know what to expect they're going to do. So I do recommend looking for the nanny ahead of time if you're going to have one. But I don't think mentally there's a lot you can do to prepare. I think it's a little bit of ripping off the Band-Aid, and it's going to feel really hard, and then it's going to feel not so hard, and then your brain's going to feel glad to have some adult stimulation, hopefully, and your baby will love you when you come home, and they'll be okay when you're gone. So I don't think there's much else you can do. In terms of pumping, I think you can pump if you're a breastfeeding mom and make some bottles if you're going to be out of the house. When to pump can be a little bit tricky. If you have a great supply in the morning, many people will pump after that first morning feed if they've gotten a little stretch overnight somewhere in there. If some babies only feed on one breast at this point, not all, some, you can pump the other breast. Um, if you have a little bit left after a feed, you can try to pump that. Small amounts do eventually add up. And just remember, ultimately, you're pumping on Monday for your milk on Tuesday. You're pumping on Tuesday for your milk on Wednesday. You don't have to be so far ahead of time, so far ahead of the game. You just have to have kind of that first day ready to go. So it's not so tough in that regard, I don't think. In terms of pumping when you're at work, I find pumping at work really challenging, but I've done it. I assume, Judith, you've probably done it. I think make it as easy for you as you can. Some people pull up a picture of their baby while they're pumping. They find it helps with letdown. And then do whatever you can. So, I did not clean my pump parts. If I was pumping more than once, I wiped them down with like a Medela sanitizing pad. With my first. With my second, I did nothing. I figured breast milk can probably sit out for 4 hours. So it was going to sit in the tubing and it was going to, the pumping parts, and it was going to be fine. I think you want to try to condense that pump to as short a time as you can because you have to get back to work. For me, I found it helpful to see my patients and then pump and try to return phone calls. And I could kind of, either use a pumping bra or hold the pump parts with one hand and hold the phone with the other. But oftentimes you can get something done during that. Parents are used to hearing that kind of whoosh, 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 whoosh noise in the background when you call them back. So it obviously depends on what your job is. I do say to moms, if you can't pump at work, it's okay. This is a time you may transition to formula. That's okay. If you want to pump at work, then decide that and do everything you can to protect that time. Patients will wait 5 minutes. The phone call will wait 5 minutes. I think so. It depends on what your work situation is. But if you want to do it, hopefully there's a way you can. I don't think I have anything else to say about it. I don't know if you had any different tips.
I usually mention somewhere between 2 and 4 weeks. I had mentioned it last, lives to try to introduce a bottle, every so often, just because if the baby's refusing the bottle, that can make going back to work a little bit more stressful. Like, she's not taking a bottle. What am I supposed to do? How's this child going to feed? Just to comment on that briefly, the child will find a way to feed. So it will be really hard for you. So eventually they'll probably just give in and take the bottle. Every so often I'll have one of these babies like 3 times before the breastfeeds, 3 times before the mother leaves for work from 9 until 5. During that time, they barely take anything, and then they breastfeed a bunch when the mother comes home. And it's not easy for the mother by any means, because when do you ever have a break? But if I this is sort of why I'd say introduce a bottle as soon as possible, just so you're not stuck in this position. But sometimes there's nothing you can do about it. So I think that's about it. Let me see if anybody asked any questions. Oh, I don't know what I just did. Hmm, I don't know. And I don't think anyone has asked anything, but I hope everyone's enjoying themselves on this gorgeous day and this wonderful weekend, which I
And
think
I think just before we disconnect you, just really quick, just to remember, this is I think 2 months is a really hard time. My little pep talk for my moms is always, I think this is actually the hardest. I think people think it's going to get easier. You think you're going to get more sleep. You're still pretty sleep deprived. The babies aren't doing a whole lot yet. Sometimes your support systems have left. Grandparents have gone back to their original states, and dads are back at work or partners or whatever situation. And so I think the thing to remember is it will get easier. It gets a lot easier somewhere between 3 and 4 months. It's still work. I mean, we all know that, but you will get more sleep. If your baby doesn't give you more sleep on your own, we will help you find a way to make your baby give you more sleep. They will get developmentally more exciting. It does get easier. So you have to kind of trudge through this, I think, but it's the light is at the end of the tunnel at this point. You're getting closer, I like to tell parents.
I agree. It's still a tough time. Keep on going. This is when you start to feel a little more exhausted. A lot of the adrenaline's running out, but it really gets so much better somewhere between 3 and 4 months. I totally agree, Jess.
Right.
All right, bye guys. Enjoy the day. It's gorgeous out.